Welcome to the show, guys. We're very excited to have you guys here today in my new office. Even better than the last one, more palatial.
That's a great office. Look at how many workers you got busy working in the background there.
Since Adam still hasn't hit his like bogey, we haven't bought him a new virtual background yet, but we're working on it. But yeah, welcome to the show. This is Capital Interactive with your host Besim and the Boz. We've got a great follow-up to our last video, which was on working capital lines of credit. This is a part 2. We're going to dig a little bit deeper on a couple of quick, exciting, well, not really exciting, but on a couple of important pieces. The borrowing base and AR aging report. So we want to go through some sample borrowing base and AR aging reports and talk to you about how banks are looking at them, how they work, what the different columns are, what you need to understand about them, because when you're doing the larger lines of credit, they're going to be very important. So anyways, we're going to jump into it here in a minute, but I got to ask my boy Adam how he's doing today.
Oh, dude, I'm doing well. Clearly not as well as you. If you could do me a favor, have your assistant get me a cup of coffee. Is she in the back? Oh, wait, nobody's in the office.
I sent them all home for the day. They're quarantining for coronavirus.
Yeah, well, that's smart. Well, then what are you doing in the office? I mean,
oh man, well, if nobody's here, I can take advantage of all the space. Yeah.
There's a lot of room for activity.
Man, you're very formal today. Usually I'm the one wearing a button-up shirt. Today, man, I'm taking it casual. No headphones, no button-up shirt. We're gonna just jump into this. I figure they're gonna be watching you go through the barroom base anyways. They're not gonna see me. So but we are representing Houston with the Astros hat there. Not the Brewers, but the Astros.
Repping them Milwaukee Brewers strong. They're gonna have a good season this year.
Yeah, well,
have a good year.
Good stuff, man. But so we're going to talk about these couple of things, for y'all's reference. If you want just the general basics of lines of credit, go back and look at the last video. We'll put a link to it right up here. Just so you guys know, Adam's been doing these lines of credit probably for 15 years or more. So he's very familiar with them. There are a lot of nuances to the lines of credit, to the borrowing bases and to the AR aging reports. Everyone's AR aging reports slightly different, depending on how you kind of manage your bookkeeping and your accounting. And then the borrowing bases are going to be kind of specific to your deal and kind of the parameters of your deal. But we're going to go through on a high level just so you understand the basics of them and kind of some of the key components today. As we always say, you got to look at your specific situation because, we're just talking about generalities here. This is more for informational purposes and kind of give you a little bit of tools to kind of have better conversations with your banker and with your accounting team and whatnot. Right. So that's what we're going to go do today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are speaking in generalities, but a lot of this stuff is applicable to most lines of credit, especially lines of credit on a borrowing base. And, when we had our last podcast where we talked specifically about working capital lines of credit, two of the points that we brought up were some can be on a borrowing base. That's what we'll discover and talk about today. And then also how that's supplemented with an AR aging report, because ARs really, constitute the majority of the secondary source of repayment or the collateral on these lines. But a lot of people, either have an assumption, mistake, or otherwise that the amount of receivables that they have is the amount of line of credit that they can get. And that's just simply not true for a number of different factors. As we mentioned before, there's an advance rate that's applied. So even if you have 100% of this eligible base of receivables, a bank generally looks at about 80% of that value for a number of different reasons. And so what I think would be helpful is we kind of dig into the minutia now of the calculations and how we look at a borrowing base to determine the right size of a line of credit for a business. Because a lot of this is driven by what's the right size of a line. Oftentimes a company wants a line that's way larger than what they should have. And the collateral is really what kind of ties that in and brings that back down to the right capacity. So now that we're going to get into the specifics, we're going to share our screen and we're going to go over two basic forms and sheets that a bank is going to look at, provided by a client, one provided by the bank. The first being the AR aging, and then we'll dovetail that right into the borrowing base certificate. But let's start with an AR aging report and kind of go over some of the specifics that you see on a very common, very general AR aging report. All right. So this is everyone that can see the screen right now is looking at a very typical, very common AR aging report. This one obviously is fairly dated. It's from 2015, but basically an AR aging report is a point in time reporting of all the receivables you have at any given moment. And as we talked about in our last video, you have a working capital cycle. One of the latter steps in the working capital cycle is when you create billings, you create ARs. Now, until you collect on them, these are the outstanding payments due to you by clients for goods and services rendered. So what a bank will do, we're going to look at this report and we're going to go through quite a few iterations of what we need to drill down to get from the total accounts receivable picture to eligible. That's all a bank is trying to do. Where's your starting point? And where's our ending point? So if we look at this AR aging report, the first column is total. It kind of breaks out every client and how much they have in particular as it pertains to an aging or a payment due. So in this case, we're looking at roughly, let's assume these numbers are in thousands, 18 million of receivables, 17,922. And typically those reports are in thousands. So we're looking at about 18 million of receivables. That's our base. But we're not going to. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say actually, the first thing I look at usually is this total column when I'm looking at an AR agent report. And the first thing I'm saying is what big numbers jump out to me, because what I usually like to look at first is kind of, are there concentrations in customers? And so
that's where I was going to go.
Oh,
okay. Thanks for stealing that thunder. No, take it. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
But I like to just get the easy work out of the way. So I say, like, where are the big numbers on this column? So I look down total and look if there's any big numbers on there. And if, like, as we scroll down here, we see like the biggest numbers are really like
2.3
2.3 million. And what we're looking for is there any one of these numbers that looks like it's going to be roughly 20% or more, 25% or more of the total AR? And so, if the total AR is, 18 million, then we're really looking, is there anything over here that's 35, 36 million and above in AR? And we're looking at this report, I don't really see anything. So that's kind of the one of the first
3.5, 3.6 million, generally would be the start of a concentration.
Let's say there was one on here that was like $8 million. Okay. Adam, how does the bank going to look at that?
Right. So a lot of factors go into that simple comment. Let's assume there's an $8 million receivable of this 18 million. So a bank is really now going to start going back with some questions. How long has this client been a client of yours? Do you have a contract for a number of years to going forward? Because the risk to the bank is if we lend on a number where there's a large concentration for one client and that client goes away, your base is substantially reduced, thereby meaning we really don't have the capacity to lend as much as we would if we're taking into account that concentration. So a bank really needs to understand that client. Has that client been with you for 20 years? Are they going to be with you for another 10, 15, 20 years? Do they have a contract where they are going to do work? Those are some mitigants to a concentration. Now, on the other side of the coin, that's a brand new client that you just got last year. You have no pending ongoing work or no guarantee that they're going to be a client going forward. That concentration could be significantly reduced in terms of what we advance on it, or potentially not credited at all. And again, it goes to, we want as stable a picture, as stable a base as receivables as we can get. And when you have these blips, these one-offs, these huge concentrations, there is a risk to both the client and the bank that we would potentially having a line of credit that's not sustainable with at least one certain concentration on your report.
Yeah. And so one other thing that I've seen a lot happen is, let's say there was an $18 million like line item on here for a total. Well, I've seen, for example, where there's multiple contracts with that one company. And so, for example, one of the mitigants is, hey, yes, we, this is one of our clients, but we have 13 different contracts in these different areas. Even if 3 of them went away, like, we still have an additional 10 contracts. Here's the volume of money coming through on each contract. So, but it all, when you're looking at an AR agent report, it looks like it's all one client, but I've seen, like you said, if there's a long history, it's a large stable company, sometimes banks will like allow for a concentration of maybe 30% on it or something like that. But either way, you're probably gonna get it trimmed back a bit and try to get it closer to that 20%. And like you said, if it's something new or something, maybe they might even eliminate it at all. So but that's one of the first things that I look at. So I started to steal your thunder, Adam. Let's go to the next. Let's keep it moving.
Wouldn't be the first time. Oh, yeah. So we got concentrations kind of, pinpointed in, Besim's, right? I think every bank is going to look for the big hitters right away. What's the largest piece of this pie? Now, in this particular AR aging, which is somewhat, common, what we see from a lot of clients, it's pretty diverse. There's, 20, 30 clients on here. Nobody too much of the piece of the pie, which is good. It's what we want to see. We want to have a very spread client base with receivables, kind of dinking and dunking, but nobody too large in terms of the total concentration. One of the things we need to do now is delineate what's an eligible receivable in a number of different ways. So receivables are only eligible when they're aged under 90 days. But to a point we made in the last video, we need to, as a bank, understand first and foremost, because we see this a lot, what that current column means. What is current? Is current you literally just sent the bill out and it retains in that column for a couple of days before it switches to this, that, and the other? We need to know what current means, because everyone's terms for their current column is different. It's not uniform between all lines of businesses, between different companies. So we need to know what current is. But generally speaking, you'll see current being the 0 to 30 day kind of terms. Let's assume that that's the case in this example. Current is we've sent out a bill, and until it hits 30, it stays as what we call current, i.e. this client has paid so much of that portion of their AR within 30 days, or all of their portion within 30 days. That's what it would be in. Once you still have an outstanding receivable past 30 days, naturally, as you can see, you can follow along, it goes to over 30. Once it goes past 30, it goes to over 60, and then so on and so forth, over 90. We've even seen some reports that have a column that goes 120, 150. Now, there's a caveat in there. So typically, we don't take anything over 90. But oftentimes, depending on what your receivable base is, you'll see this a lot with government ARs. Government ARs typically take longer to collect. Those are the terms they built in. So it's not a hard and fast rule that we won't take anything aged over 90 days, but we have to know that's part of the contract. It's part of the receivable agreement you have with that client, because the general rule of thumb is once a receivable is aged past 3 months, 90 days, the likelihood of the company collecting on that receivable and being made whole is greatly reduced. So that's the risk the bank is accounting for, is that we don't want anything over 90 days.
Sometimes you'll see, on that current column, like you said before, people will give a due date for a bill, and if it's before that due date, sometimes that's what they call current. But you're right. Most of the time, it's 1 to 30 days. One question. Okay, so getting kind of to the aging of a certain line item of AR. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this. Okay, let's look at, for example, where it says Consolidated Service Corporation, like 5 or 6. Oh, actually, it's Lois Clark, I think. No, Lois Clark, right above that. So the total AR for Lois Clark is 2.3 million, roughly. Mm-hmm. Okay, but if you look at the over 90 column, it's about 1.074 million is over 90.
Almost half.
Almost half. So tell us how a bank's going to look at that particular.
Right. So these types of accounts, now, again, everything is pending some sort of explanation, because it could be explained. Maybe Lois gets these super, super long terms and historically she pays. We don't know that. But generally, what a bank will see is this falls into a category of what's called a cross-aged receivable. So in this case, we have 50% of your total receivables aged over 90, aged over a period where you might not collect. And it depends on what bank sets that threshold out, that comfortability at. But once a certain amount of receivables is aged past 90, all of those
for that particular
receivable, for that particular client, all of those receivables are deemed null and void, and they're ineligible. So in this case, what I would see, if we don't have an understanding of Lois Clark and what her agreement is with the company, and it's just half of her receivables are aged past 90, she's never paid in slower or longer than 30 days, we don't know what's going on with her, we would consider that a cross-aged. 50% is aged past ineligible. All of her receivables, the full 2.3 and some change, would be deemed ineligible, because we don't want to put that on a report as a true AR if the likelihood of collecting that is not going to happen. So we're going to call that a cross age receivable.
Yeah, I mean, because the thought process is hey, if this person hasn't paid you this one particular piece of AR already, you might have just keep billing her, and all those things are all going to go bad. They just haven't aged out there yet, and
Correct.
so that's one thing that people are going to dig into. Bankers are going to dig into. They're going to want to understand, why are things going past 90 days, and it can be an issue because, like, look at this. If you have, like on here, there's maybe 2 or 3 clients that have significant balances past 90 days. That might be 5 million of your AR right there. All of a sudden, from 18 million, you're down to let's say 12 million in eligible receivables, just like that. Because
that is 5 million of their AR. If you look at the over 90 column,
see, there we go. Yeah, so
5 million.
Yeah. But what I meant was like some of them over 90 days are a significant portion of the overall.
Oh, sure. Look at Mike Olson on the screen. His
that's what I'm saying.
Receivable base is aged over 90. Now, again, maybe he has a sweetheart term where he can pay in 100 days. Again, all this needs to be fleshed out and figured out. But at the end of the day, to Besim's point, we're starting with a base of receivables of 18, but your starting point of eligibility might actually be 12 because that 5 ain't looking too good.
Yeah, that 5's already over a quarter of your receivables. So, you might have been looking at your AR agent report saying, okay, I got 18 million. They're going to advance me, like 15 or, whatever, 14 and a half. But really, just because of that, you're already down to starting from 12 and really probably going to get less than 10. So it's a significant thing because it's knocking out the entire line item, which could be significant amount. So you need to make sure that you're really staying on top of your AR and collecting as soon as possible. And if not, be ready to speak to those things and maybe even point them out ahead of time and say, hey, we have special terms with these particular clients because here's our contract. And some banks will understand for industries, for example, oil and gas. They're notorious for paying in like 120 days. So it's just got to know. Okay, so we talked through a little bit of the cross agings. Before we get kind of into the numbers there, let's talk a little bit about the customers. Because one thing that we see on here is there's a lot of individuals' names on here. There's some companies in here, but if you're talking to a commercial bank, most of the time they're not going to want to take individual names as AR, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's exactly right. We typically want to see, what we're looking for is business to business transaction here. It looks like it's to a degree B2C. What is this? What are you selling to individual customers? And, what kind of recourse do you have if they're not paying? What agreement do you have? Really, I only see 1, 2, 3, a handful of companies, but it's predominantly littered with, personal names. What we also see sometimes is you see a personal name on here. You might even see the owner's name on here, or some intercompany or whatnot receivable. Also something to look at. We're not going to take an intercompany receivable generally because that's not really truly part of the cycle, as it were. Not to mention when you have intercompany receivables, there's really no obligation to pay from one company to the other. You can slow pay that. Typically, we see that. So we're seeing a mix here, and it's not just companies on there. We're seeing a lot of personal names as well. Which is atypical.
Another thing you mentioned earlier as well was government receivables. Them being historically long to pay, and a lot of times banks won't even take them at all. So we're going to look through these names a little bit and see, is there anything on here that like looks like it's a foreign receivable, anything that looks like it's government. So if we start seeing, like a lot of times, like you'll see the abbreviations for foreign companies, like we have LLC or Inc. or whatever foreign, like it might say AG or SA or something like that. And then those are like kind of indications that some of these might be foreign companies. And so the bank's going to go through and kind of talk to you a little bit. Hey, how many of these are actually international clients? Is this a foreign AR, that type of stuff as well? Because those are all going to be reduced as well for the most part, especially if they're not insured.
The mindset behind not wanting to take foreign ARs is an American bank needs to perfect on American assets. It's really hard. It's difficult to perfect on a foreign receivable. You're talking about another country, another jurisdiction. They might not uphold the same laws and regulations that we do. So typically we don't want to see a foreign AR because, again, it's something that we can't, as any institution, cannot perfect on that. When I mean perfecting is when you have a collateral position, be it first or otherwise, you have to make sure you're in a perfected position, meaning if you need to collect on that, there's no roadblocks, there's no speed bumps along the way to do that. Foreign ARs is an incredibly large speed bump and roadblock on the way. Now, that being said, I've had clients that carry what's called foreign AR insurance, which is a way to ensure that those foreign receivables are valid, are eligible, and we can collect on. The problem with that is it's very cost prohibitive for most clients. We're talking high five figures. I mean, it could be 40, 50, 60, $70,000 to carry this insurance just to make sure those receivables are eligible. Now, where that comes into play is that cost prohibitive based on how many foreign ARs you have? I mean, why would you have $40,000 of AR insurance to add 200,000 worth of foreign ARs? It really doesn't mathematically work out. But I've had clients that have millions and millions of dollars of foreign ARs. Then it makes a little bit more sense to potentially carry AR insurance so that we can consider those ARs valid. And so that's the mindset behind foreign ARs.
Okay. Adam, getting back to the over 90 days stuff real quickly. So we talked about if it was on one line item and majority of it was over 90 days. Let's just say it is like this. Let's say that, okay, nothing's over 10% in 90 days, but the total for the entire borrowing base, AR aging is still as it shows here, 4.9 million. What's going to happen with that 4.9 million? When we go to the borrowing base and look at what we're going to be able to use for collateral.
Right. So your starting number is going to be around 12 million. That's going to be your starting, air quotes, eligible receivables. That's just the starting point. So you see 18 as total. Everything 90 and above, in this case, roughly 5 million, gets reduced from that total of 18. So a borrowing base is going to start with a base of 12 million. And from there, it will be, reduced and potentially, reduced further based on several factors.
Yeah. So just to kind of be clear, what I was talking about before versus what Adam just said, we're going to reduce the total amount of eligible,
the
starting point down to 12 because almost 5 million, 4.94 is already over 90 days. But for example, back to Lois Clark, we're also going to reduce by that additional
2.3.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, it'll be cross-aged potentially. So yeah, the full 2.3 likely will get reduced.
Yeah, but I'm saying that first, the 1.074 is already taking the 90 days, but we're also by that additional 1.051. Yeah, that's also going to be taken out. So really, instead of 12, just because of that one thing, you're already down to 11.
Down to 11. Yeah.
So that's kind of what I wanted to make sure that was clear because I don't know if that was kind of clear earlier.
Yeah. So keep in mind. So let's just look at one line item. If anything is deemed cross-aged, you effectively strike that whole thing away from the equation. So yeah, it's not just 12 because it's the 18 million total less the 5 over 90. Lois's current portion that's in the that 1051 and current goes away as well. So yeah, further reduction of the base just on the likelihood that that's not going to be collected. Because what you would see, assuming nothing gets changed and this is left unabated, that 1051 migrates over to the 30 column. That 1051 migrates over to the 60 column, and that 1051 joins the over 90 amount that we already have. That's likely what's going to happen, and you're never going to collect on that.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Anything else we need to be looking at here on this account? It's receivable.
No, that covers pretty much everything from concentrations, foreign ARs, government potential contracts in there, the difference between a personal receivable and a company receivable, and the different bogeys and why there's more weight put into what is eligible versus not eligible based on its age. But again, I think if you take nothing else away from looking at the AR aging report, it's knowing that you have to have your hands around your receivables. Just because you send something out does not mean you're going to collect it. We really need to know as an institution what is constituting your ARs, and that you know what your payment terms are, and that you're comfortable that you're going to be repaid for that.
Perfect. Yeah, so I think that was a good overview. Okay,
Yeah.
before we bring up the sample borrowing base, let's just give again a real quick overview of what a borrowing base is, like a definition wise,
Sure.
and how often banks will be looking at them, things like that, just so
Yeah.
people are up to speed what we're about to show them.
Very simply, a borrowing base is a predetermined set aside amount of money that a bank is willing to lend based on a thorough collateral valuation. Now, that borrowing base can vary. A borrowing base, when that formula is determined, that's your max amount. That max amount can vary based on how often you're submitting a borrowing base, be it semi-annually, quarterly, or most commonly monthly. The screen we're about to show you, typically when you're on a borrowing base, you submit monthly to validate where your line should be. So when we talked about lines of credit the other day, we talked about a bank doing a borrowing base for $10 million. $10 million is what was initially determined a bank is willing to lend you based on your collateral base. And that will vary from month to month. There's months it's going to go down from 10 million because your collateral base doesn't justify 10 at the time. There's months it's going to go up. Let's say you went down from 10 to 7 month to month. Next month, you have it's end of the quarter. It's typically very strong. You have a higher collateral base. You submit a borrowing base with 15 million of eligible collateral. We'll bump the line back up to 10. And then based on where your line is at from a borrowing base submission determines if you're overfunded or underfunded on the line. A lot of times we can see lines be reduced based on eligibility, but there's more on the line outstanding versus the line of the size that you should have. So generally speaking, monthly, we're going to look at a borrowing base, and a borrowing base just simply determines what we need to right size the line for this month. Where should it be? That's the very 10,000 foot view of a borrowing base.
Yeah. So this is like Adam said, this is probably almost on a monthly basis. You're going to be submitting this, and this is going to be dictating how much you can actually borrow on the line that's been set aside for you. Mm-hmm. Now, this particular borrowing base, I want to draw your attention to something very important on this one. The bank on this particular borrowing base
it's a good bank.
It's an amazing bank. And if you have the opportunity, I would really go check this bank out because, I mean, oh my God, this bank has so much capital. Let me pull it up here for you.
It's the bank of ballers is what it is.
So that Bank of Boz, man, that thing is
yeah.
Capital. That's what when you're talking about like fully funded capital. That's Bank of Boz.
Yeah. You want to go to the Bank of Boz.
I borrow some money, man. I'll make up a borrowing base.
Yeah, we're going to run a simple credit check on you, like we do on everybody, and and
then I'll be disqualified.
Exactly. I didn't want to say it, but yeah. So
okay, so this is
Bank of Boz.
This is ABC Company, and they've got a commitment amount of $2 million here. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? Commitment amount of $2 million.
So commitment amount is the max committed line of credit that they can have. They can have no more than 2 million, but if they provide enough, if they substantiate enough collateral, they can borrow all the way up to 2 million. Yeah. And they have to validate that every month.
Yeah, exactly. So this means that no matter, so even if you have, 10 million in collateral, max you can borrow is 2 million because that's what's been committed to by the bank. Right. And just to reiterate, based on your actual deal with the bank, your borrowing base it's going to look different. Every bank's format's slightly different, but this is just a base outline of kind of what they kind of look like. Okay, Boz. So we got the deep pockets of Bank of Boz lending here. Let's start with the accounts receivable. First part of the borrowing base here. What goes up here?
Yeah, accounts receivable is going to be everything that you've listed at that point in time. So the AR aging that we just looked at, that's what we're going to look at. That's going to be our starting. That's going to be our base is 18 million, technically 17.9, but whatever. Let's call it 18 million. That's our total accounts receivable. But as we mentioned earlier, that's what you're bringing to the bank. A bank is not going to fully view that at 18 million, but we're going to use that as a starting base. That's okay. Our point in time. So that first section, we see 18 million of receivables. Okay. But what happens is the changes go into the meat of it, which is all the deductions that we're going to take from that 18.
Yeah,
quite a few of those we've mentioned.
And like I think you've mentioned in the past, that top part, in some banks, like you already reduced like some of the things up there, and you might just start off with the 12 million. But on this particular one, we're starting with 18 million, and all the deductions come in this second portion here. So we started with 18 million. First line item on number four right there. There's the
first one. We know that's roughly 5 million, right? So your ARs aged over 90 days from your invoice, from your current section, anything over that is going to be reduced. So that's roughly 5 million. We're sitting now, rather than 18, we're sitting at about 12.
Yep.
So that's going to be the first one. We don't have contra accounts necessarily, although from time to time you will, have that again. If you have a lot of those intercompany receivables and so on and so forth, you'll see some of that there. This one, we didn't have a concentration over 30%, but to our point earlier, when we were looking at the aging, here we might discount. Not that we won't include some of those receivables, but we're going to look at concentrations over 30%, and maybe some will accept, some we won't. Again, based on what we know about the client and the business and what they have going forward. Like we said, a 20-year company, they're going to do business with you for 20 years. We're not going to take that out. New customer you got last year, you haven't heard from them all this year. You don't know if you can do any business. Probably take that concentration out from an eligibility standpoint. What we mentioned with Lois Clark, isn't it Lois Lane? Technically, was Superman. Is Lois Clark like their daughter?
That's after she got married to what's his name? What was
Clark Kent?
Oh, his first name was Clark.
His first name was Clark. So that's the nerd in me. But yeah, Lois Clark, who must be some estranged, cousin or something like that. She basically had what we would assume is a cross aging. So a cross aging is 25% in this borrowing base example. I've seen them go as low as 20. And what that means is if 25% or more of your agings is over the ineligibility marker, the 90, then it all gets stripped out. In this case, we saw 50% of her receivables basically were over 90. So clearly in excess of this cross aging of 25% roughly. So Lois's amount is going to get backed out of there.
Yep.
Let's talk about foreign receivables and any type of foreign accounts. We didn't see any per se on that report, but let's assume one of those was from Venezuela. We're going to knock that one out.
Yeah, well, here it even says without insurance or else
without insurance. Exactly.
So that's without it being basically guaranteed. So yeah, that's correct. All getting knocked out.
Yep. You don't even have a local government receivable. You have a federal government receivable. We're definitely going to take that one out. At the federal level, those are very hard to stick to in AR report.
Yeah, if you go under, the bank's not going to be able to get money from the government for your AR.
Good luck.
Your AR.
Again, any type of affiliate, intercompany, employer accounts. So, our owner's wife has an AR with the company. We're not going to take that. Again, typically those don't have repayment terms. Whereas with a client, you say, 210 net 30. So if you pay X amount, early, you'll get a discount. Otherwise, it's all due in 30. You'll have terms with clients. But if you create a receivable with a shareholder in the company because they had to do X, Y, or Z, generally those are pay as you're comfortable. So we're going to back those out.
Yeah. Number 11 is that over 90 credits. I think you're actually adding back here.
That would be an example if you like healthcare and some, like I said earlier, government contracts, typically they extend out beyond 90 days. And at times those are eligible and true and correct. They just extend and have longer terms generally. Sometimes you will get credit for that. So it doesn't get backed out in that first column, number 4, anything aged over 90 days. We might take everything over 90 days, back it out, but then we might give you credit on
a few line items,
for that kind of stuff where it is deemed true and accurate.
And the bank it'll be very clear too. So it's not like some kind of thing that's going to change every time. The bank will say, if it's coming from, Shell Oil Company, will take it up to 120 days, or if it's coming from Blue Cross Blue Shield, we're going to take that up to 120 days. So it'll be very clear there, and then you'll be able to add that back on this example in that over 90 credits.
Right. So there's a lot of deductions. There's some additions. There's mostly subtractions. Just to kind of boil it down to a base, true and accurate number, but really where it starts to get even less is when we apply an advance rate. If you're going to look at line number 15, we started with 18. We're down to about 11, let's call it 10 million. So 18 became 10. 10 now becomes 8 million. We are going to, based on just ARs, allow a line. Could be no more than you have 8 million of eligible and advanced collateral. And again, advance is, yes, you have 10 million of AR collateral. We take 80% of that. So 8 million as the valuation, because as a bank, for us to collect on the receivables, there's going to be a degree of receivables we cannot collect. There's also basically what we would call a holding cost of those receivables. The bank doesn't collect on receivables. We'd have to probably factor that out and hire that out to have somebody collect receivables on our behalf. That comes as an expense to the bank. So that's why, even though 10 was your boiled down number from 18 to 10, we're not going to take 10. It's going to be 8.
Yep.
And you're that rarely changes. Like 80 is the best advance rate you're going to get. Sometimes you can even see it go lower than 80% depending on the situation.
Exactly.
So what we have in addition to that, and we talked about this in the last video, so we're not going to get into it here, but we can also take into account inventory. If you really want to know some of the inner workings of inventory, go watch the Line of Credit podcast. I believe we linked it earlier, but go watch the Line of Credit podcast, because we really talk about inventory. There's nothing too much to dig into there. Yeah. And so here
it's only like a few items. Let's just basically say, what you're going to do here is it says what's the total value of the inventory, less ineligible inventory, which a lot of times was that work in process. Yeah. And then so the eligible advance rate, we're going to give you, whatever it is, towards the inventory here, it says 100%.
It's never 100%. It's typically 50%. 50% is pretty common across.
And then what they're going to do most of the time is that whatever that number is, they're going to compare it to the AR number, and it needs to be less than the AR. So it's going to be trimmed back to below the AR. So the AR number is going to need to be at least 50% of the total amount of the eligibility of the line for the most part. There are situations where it's different. Okay, but now we're down to the maximum loan amount where it's 2 million. So now even though you had this 8 million of availability that we talk through all the time, all you're getting is the 2 million advance rate, because you're going to get the lesser of the two. I mean, right?
Yeah, so you're going to get the lesser of the two. Exactly. In this example, if the commitment amount was 9, or, let's say a year ago, we agreed to a $9 million maximum commitment amount, your line would be reduced for this month to 8 million. I mean, I don't know how much we're going to assume inventory adds to it, but we boiled ARs down from 18 to 10 to 8. Right. But in this case, we do have an example of a $2 million line of credit. You get the lesser of what your collateral after advance is or commitment amount. In this case, we have a $2 million line. You have verified, you have justified this month that you can still maintain that maximum commitment amount of 2. Now, next month, you submit a borrowing base, and all these boil down to, rather than 8 million like it was this month, maybe off at your strong quarter, you submit a borrowing base of 1.5 million. Well, everything boils down to, after advance rate, after everything, 1.5 million.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
And so what happens here, actually, so after we decide, what is the total amount that was theoretically available, the next thing is going to say is what amount do you have drawn on the line, which is that line number 24 there. And that's going to then be reduced from whatever the maximum amount of borrowing was. So let's say you had $1 million on there, your 2 million was what you have available, you had $1 million on there, then you would have 1 million left that you are able to borrow on. If you pay down and use it, you'd have more. But if it was above the 2 million, then the bank would be asking you to pay that down to get underneath what the maximum loan amount was.
Correct. Yeah. You always have to right size.
Yeah. And then just since it's on here, let's just real briefly, if you look at the very bottom of this particular borrowing base, there's also a few things on here which talk about, different types of covenants where you have, it says asset coverage ratio, things like that. And we'll just put another link up right here to our covenant podcast, which talks through what some of those are, because that's something that kind of goes along with it as well. But I mean, I think this is a real basic view of the borrowing base certificate. Before I take it off the screen, anything else you want to cover on this one?
No, the only other thing I do want to say is, obviously these borrowing bases are done typically by, either a dedicated team or dedicated analyst that really knows your situation. So as it goes on in perpetuity, it does become, I don't want to call it a smooth process, but it's definitely a little bit more streamlined where we know historically, this is one of those, like, there's a lot of work up front, but, going on after the fact, you can get a lot more comfortable with the bank and the analyst that looks at this because they know what accounts are good, what accounts are not. And it can be, a relatively seamless transition month over month. But yeah, when we're doing this is not, something that just us as a relationship manager are looking at. There's typically dedicated teams that really go into the minutia of the ARs. They know the clients, they know the companies.
I did the job. I'm sure you did it.
Oh,
too.
Did you really? I mean, I know borrowing bases. I've seen them for 15 years. I've never calculated one. Now I've gone over the calculations just to make sure everything.
I had to do that as a credit analyst. That's what I was doing for like the very beginning of my credit training. All I did was do the borrowing bases, checking like every quarter or month or wherever it was. I had to do that.
It was a good way to learn. It's a good way to learn collateral base.
Yeah. So it's but that's really it. I mean, from a borrowing base certificate, it's pretty straightforward. A responsible banker is going to go through all this with you ahead of time before you actually ink your deal. Make sure that you know everything before you get into it, because I mean, they don't want there to be covenant breaches. They don't want there to be, issues with the borrowing base. They want you to be able to borrow as much as you can. And it's good to understand how they work, because some of the things are negotiable. And if you know that, hey, I'm going to have this concentration, or this is going to be an issue for me, or whatever, then you want to be able to negotiate that in so that when your borrowing base is tested, those things are not as much of an issue for you.
Yeah, well, it all goes back to what we've said in a number of podcasts, and that's being prepared and just kind of knowing your business. You'd think it's common sense, but, some people really don't know. So the more prepared you are, the better you're armed to have a conversation like that. So.
Yeah, and that's what we're hoping to help you with, is
absolutely
get some information so you can have better conversations and get more out of your relationship with your bankers, and you kind of help your business. So, I mean, but I think that's a really good covering. If you guys have more questions, make sure to leave them in the comments. But I think that's a pretty good coverage of the borrowing base.
I would agree, sir. I think we killed it. I'll stop by your office in about 20 minutes.
I'll put on a pot of coffee, man.
Make sure you put on a mask too.
I'll valet your your parking.
Yeah. Well, here at the Bank of the Baz, we drive high class vehicles. I want to valet.
I know. Well, I'll work on that for next time. Anyways, guys, we really appreciate you joining us. Make sure you keep on hitting the like button, because we need to get Adam his own virtual background here, because
this got to go. It's got to go.
But like we said, make sure you like, subscribe, let us know what other topics you want us to cover. We're here for you to get you good information so you can have the better conversations. And until next time, this is Adam and Besim. See you soon.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. It's Capital Interactive with Besim and the Baz, and go Brewers. Brew Crew.
See
you later, guys. Bye.